the themes that has animated me a lot over the last few years has been the idea that in changing the city, we can change ourselves. So the question of what kind of city do we want cannot be divorced from the question what kind of people do we want to be. And it's that dialectic, if you like, which has concentrated my attention on how people think about the world, how they think about their environment, how they respond to it. And there's actually a long history of thinking about this, which I think is worthwhile rehearsing a little bit. Engels, in the tradition of the working class of England in 1844, recounted his experience when he sailed into London and encountered this vast metropolis. And he just couldn't understand how this metropolis could possibly work. It was war of all against all. It was sort of a Darwinian world. And he just took the view that that city, that environment, was going to give rise to a certain kind of personality which was going to be extremely hard to deal with and would require radical reform if we were going to bring out the best in people. Later on in the century, there was a guy, George Simmel, who did a similar kind of thing on metropolis and mental life. And the theme was that the modern metropolis is a kind of place where, in order to live, you have to become, as it were, disassociated. It's almost necessary to be alienated from much of what's going on around you, to lose perspective on it, to cultivate what Simmel called a blasé attitude, disinterested, using other people for your own purposes. At the same time as there was an order which was being imposed by a social system that was structuring space and time according to certain rules and regulations, and in particular the tyranny of the clock. And Simmel had this wonderful image, which I think is an idea you might want to cultivate. He said, what would happen if all the clocks in Berlin went wrong by 1 hour? How would anybody know what to do? So here's a possibility. Go around and change all the clocks in the city and turn off all the digital times, and then see what on earth people do with it. And the point he was trying to make was that on the one hand, we find ourselves in this situation where we become blasé and cultivate a certain kind of personality, and on the other hand, we also find ourselves in a situation where the world is being structured around us in very tightly controlled ways. The traffic lights and the temporality and the spatiality, the places you can go, the places you cannot go, and the places where you're supposed to go. And that we became imbued with a certain routine as we walked through the city, so we didn't necessarily notice anything. We would get up in the morning, and as the fare said, we would sort of get in the metro, and we'd go to our job, and then we'd turn around and go back and eat our dinner and go to bed again, and that was it. So the point here is that to say that the kind of world we construct has a lot to do with the kind of personality that gets constructed out of it, and that we even lose any kind of perspective on that. And this has led me, I think, to become very interested in the kind of work you guys are doing, because it problematizes and tries to wake us up to what is there that we haven't noticed. It tries to assert that actually the city around us is a much more interesting place. There is a psychogeography. And it also puts ourselves in touch with something else, which is also something I've never really been able to write about, but it's always intrigued me a lot. It's the idea of if you like, call it a geographical unconscious. And people talk about political unconscious and all kinds of other unconscious, but what about the geographical unconscious? The way in which we think about space and time as if it is natural when it's been constructed around us. And if it has been constructed around us, it can be reconstructed. And reconstructed in a different way to actually try to produce an alternative kind of personality. One of my interesting points that's come to me more and more over the last few years is how critical suburbanization was in the United States in constructing a certain persona and a certain political and geographical unconscious. So that people lived their lives as if that second nature, which something carved out of nature to become a second nature, was the real and only possible nature. And it is still the case that most people, I think, are deeply attached to that suburban unconscious. It is even infecting New York City. You look at what's going on in the city and you see the whole damn place is being suburbanized. Even streets are becoming like shopping malls. You know, and if I see another beautiful kind of crazy square turned into a set of flower gardens, I'll just go nuts. The way in which the architecture, the feel of the city is beginning to lose more and more of its urbanity and being made into something which is okay for a suburbanite to come in and be comfortable in Times Square. A kind of a spectacle of that kind, which then puts me in line with something else. Cities evolve, they change. And they change under the imperatives of capital accumulation. That has been the basic force that has shaped our cities. And we can go on about the condominiums and all the spaces and all the rest of it. There's one aspect of it, I think, which is very interesting in relationship to, again, what you guys are doing. And that is when Guy Debord wrote The Society of the Spectacle, in a very prescient way, he kind of critiqued the way in which the commodity was becoming the spectacle. And therefore, everything was being orchestrated around the spectacle of capital and what that was about. And the big question for Debord was, is there a counter-spectacle? Is there a possibility of doing something different? Now, this Society of the Spectacle has, I think, a very important role to play in the dynamics of urbanization. I mean, Debord wrote that book in '67. But actually, more and more, what we see is cities constructed around the notion of spectacle. And that for one very simple reason. That capital accumulation wants to move faster and faster. And one of the things that capital accumulation cannot abide is a long time period in which something does not change. Therefore, dynamics moves in. I still eat my dinner with my grandmother's knives and forks. If capital only made things like that, it would have no market. So it's become very, very good at making things that break. It's been very, very good at making things that have a very, very short turnover time. It's been very good at mobilizing fashion. And it's become very good at turning more and more of the city into a spectacle which is instantaneously consumed. So that instantaneous consumption of spectacle. So that spectacle has become more and more deeply integrated into urban ways of life, and we become part of the spectacle. And actually this then gives us a certain power. Because the spectacle of a city has a lot to do with the way in which people are using it. We make space in the city by the way we use it. We are producing space as we act. If we become conscious of that, we can start to talk about the way in which we are actually producing the very commons which capital then appropriates for its own purposes. And this seems to me to be one of the paths that we might want to take in terms of thinking about the way in which culture plays out and the way in which we actually contribute to the culture. Cities are dynamic places, but of course they vary a lot in their form. I used to live in Baltimore. I had a good friend from New York who, after a few weeks in Baltimore, kind of said, you know, I think New York should go in business renting people to be on the streets of Baltimore. Because the streets of Baltimore are empty, apart from, of course, the inner city, which is populated by, you know, the folk you see in The Wire. And then a small little park, a sort of, you know, pleasure area which is completely constructed and sealed off. This is a very different kind of world to a world where people are out in the streets, where they're socializing, where they're interacting, involved. It's a world sealed off So on the one hand, we have a spectacle which is controlled from outside, and at the same time, we are not creating the spectacle ourselves. And one of the imperatives, it seems, behind the sorts of things you see in the exhibition is to go out and make a different kind of urban world. And as you make a different urban world, think about the different kind of personality, the different kind of geographical unconscious that emerges out of that world. Because on the one hand, it's very easy, I think, to see what the surface problems are, the problems of environment and inequality and all the rest of it. It's very easy to see. But what is the most difficult thing right now is to find the political subjectivity, the political will, the political anger, the political concern to go out and change it. We do understand this world. It's not too hard to understand it. We do see it around us. We must be blind not to see all of the things that are wrong with it. The problem right now is that we don't know how to change it. And that is because our heads are infected with a certain geographical unconscious which is drawn from a set of bad experiences. We've got to revolutionize the geographical unconscious. We've got to revolutionize political subjectivity. We've got to revolutionize our ways of thinking which are drawn from the kinds of environments which we live in and work in on a daily basis. We had, as Lefebvre said, to revolutionize daily life. That is what matters. And there are ways to go about that, and of course what the Situationists tried to do with psychogeography was to teach us ways to see the world in a different kind of perspective, to teach us to understand what's going on around us, but at the same time to recognize in ourselves that we have all become, in my language, we're all suburbanites now without noticing it. We're all neoliberal right now without noticing it. And until we're able to grapple with our own state of mind, then we are not going to be able to act politically. And the way in which the cartography is set up, the way in which space is problematized, is part of the way of challenging that geographical unconscious. And for that I'm profoundly grateful, because I think that the cultural activities are ways in which to actually gain access to people's minds in new and different ways.